Welcome to Classical Tuesdays in Old Town Tacoma. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been happy to be able to perform and reach our audience and those beyond our usual gathering in Slavonian Hall here in Tacoma. This season, we have been videotaping our performances and publishing them on YouTube and Facebook. This, our February 2021 event, is a conversation between Greg Youtz, professor of music at Pacific Lutheran University, and Zhang, poet, librettist, born in Beijing, now residing in Washington State. She is on the faculty of the Evergreen State College. Greg and Zhang have collaborated on the writing and composing of an opera based on the story of the expulsion of Chinese laborers, businessmen, and families living in Tacoma at that time. Let's listen in on these two artists as they discuss the opera titled Tacoma Method. And we hope to witness its premiere when performances can be live and on stage.
Well, Zhang, it's great to see you. We don't
Same
see
here.
each other enough during this pandemic.
But I'm waving here.
Oh, very good. And you're down in Olympia near the Black Hills.
Yes.
And I am here in Tacoma. But anyway, it's great to see you. And we, of course, communicate quite a bit because we're working on this opera right now as we talk about it. But right now, we're just going to have a conversation for our audience about how you make an opera about Tacoma. Now, I, of course, am a composer. I teach at PLU in the music department, and I think this is opera number 4 for me. So I have, a lot of classical music composing background. That's how I got into opera. But the story of how you got into opera is probably much more interesting. First of all, I know that you grew up in Beijing, China, and only came to this country for graduate school. I think, what year did you come to the U.S.?
1986.
1986. And I also know, and I think your audience will be really interested to know, that you have a doctoral degree from Cornell University in molecular pharmacology.
You get it right.
So that makes you, I think, a true polymath, right? Somebody who really has two areas of expertise, at least. And I know that you teach biology and genetics and public health and various things now for Evergreen State College, both here in Tacoma and at the Evergreen campus. But I also know that you teach Chinese studies there because you and I have collaborated on some fun projects there.
Yeah, I'm planning to teach Chinese study or the Chinese questions in the spring, poetries and contemporary situation. But to say this is our second opera together, Greg. Don't forget we have the Fairy Jade Cai Yan, which was performed in Pacific Lutheran by the opera department. That was a lot of fun. And then Greg enticed me, really. You are the one who tell me about this particular Tacoma Method episode because of your project with Reconciliation Foundations at Tacoma. I only vaguely aware of that through a colleague teaching at Evergreen Tacoma about the through study of Pacific Northwest history, and know this 1885 episode, 100 years, almost exactly 100 years before I come to US in 1985. So it's 1885. So it's 100 years. A lot of things has changed. So when I approached this project, I was amazed to find out the history of local history of Pacific Northwest. And then the Chinese community lived here 100 years before I arrived, coming to the scene. So I'm relearning and discover the community and trying to reconstruct who they are from books, That particular book I like, and you lended the book to me. I have to really credit you. Pacific, it's called Puget Sound History by Mary Morgan. There's a particular chapter called The Chinese Must Go. So that was really the blueprint for the research for this opera. So I read that chapter at least 10 different times and marked, because I found a lot of material from those 40 pages of that book. And then there's some additional material from a Lorraine Hildebrand book. It's called Straw Hats, Sandals, and Stills, and offer the same account, but slightly different angle about that same episode. So that's the origin of this Tacoma Method, is from that historical period of Chinese expulsion from Tacoma in 1885. Because 100 years is a long time, but it's not that long historically speaking. So I have very little trouble to find materials in English about recording that episode, because 1885 Tacoma is already a young town. The newspapers, a couple of newspapers and historical documentation of the book I was reading, they all quoting from local newspapers at that time. So I thought, wow, this is so easy. I have all these materials, the mayor's speech and the fire department chiefs, the lawyers, and all this information that's overwhelming for an opera librettist to work material-wise, because I'm sure the audience knows, the opera words is saying elongated. You can't really be too wordy. So actually my challenge is, how can I select from all these material to make sure it is contained within an hour? Yeah. And so the musicians, as little as possible, the musicians' music can carry the word out.
Yeah.
We don't have the Chinese voice, except what we have as a chord record in a book that I read later on about the testament, affidavits filed by Mr. May. When I read his testimony on the court, until his ordeals, described that day what happened when the expulsion happened. And he mentioned in 2 sentences, okay, my wife, Mr. May, didn't say that. My wife, normally a normal person, was driving mad and start to pick up a knife, start to fighting with the intruders. So when I read that, after like 2 months digging into all these piles, reading, I said, okay, here's my character. Okay, and what a drama if we have a Chinese normal housewife pick up a knife, start waving to the people who rush her, right? And I can just immediately in my mind just visualize this Chinese woman. I guess part of it's because I'm Chinese, I'm a woman, even though I'm a modern woman, I can imagine that emotion and to drive such a person into madness. So then I think when I read about her, I said, okay, we had the opera. And we have the opera because we have this central character of speaking the Chinese side. Otherwise, it was just, okay, historical things. So that's the jam of digging. Really, the Chinese part is trying to, using that 2 lines, reinvent the whole community, reinvent her background, reinvent her connections with other fellow Chinese. So, and of course, different pieces sift through the court record of all the files the Chinese family at that time lodged what they lost. So that is a process.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then what I receive, you know, looks like this. And
That's
I mark it up as I need to and stuff, but yeah, you can see that I'm just showing this up very informally because it's kind of fun to see what I get. And
yeah.
you can see that she's selected characters and she's even decided what their singing type, what their voice type is going to be: tenor, baritone, mezzo, etc.
Mhm, mhm,
And there's a lot of sort of historical research here because a director of an opera needs to know a lot, right,
mhm,
before they can do things. And then, just another thing. So I as I go to work thinking about music, I'm kind of marking things up and making little notes to myself about various things. So, by the time I got it, wow, I mean, in some ways the opera is there, and then I have to figure out, well, how do I respond to that? Let me read the lyrics to the second aria we will hear. It's the shortest set of words, but they're
mhm,
very beautiful, and I think maybe then you could comment on them.
mhm, mhm,
This is Mrs. May singing. She's upstairs in a room while the mob is pounding on her door. She's
mhm,
protecting her two little tiny children. She's terrified, but she's also just absolutely astonished that
mhm.
this is happening. And she sings, "O Tacoma, mother of waters, from two rails built by bare hands of the Chinaman, you grew into an observant Chinatown, a place we called home. We labored, we built. I poured tea to welcome all. O Tacoma, mother of waters, now you are big and strong, muscles and steel. Why do you envy my little cup?"
You read so well.
And on the page, it just looks like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I receive, and I need to turn that then into kind of musical poetry.
Can I add one more thing linked to the current situation? As I watching the mob storming the capitals, it's almost for me is going back to the mob that stormed the little town in Tacoma. If you don't look at the people on the ground, don't see humanities in each other, the result is disastrous.
Right. Well, thank you very much, librettist Zhang and myself, Gregory Youtz. We thank you for watching. We will turn now to the three arias themselves, which you will hear. I should tell you that the first two have live singers, and so you will watch my computer providing the chamber orchestra, but you will hear live singers and you'll see some images as well. And then the third aria, we have not yet had a singer. So this is still very much in process, hot off the press. So you will simply watch my computer scroll the score. You'll hear a computer voice and you can watch the words go by. So you will know what's happening. So more on those three arias just to follow. Thank you, Zhang.
Thank you, Greg. It's been such a fun working with you.
Good. The same for me. Well, let me say just a little bit then about how I turn this libretto into music for the opera. This is the aria sung by Mayor Jakob Weisbach, the mayor of Tacoma in 1885. He is an immigrant from Germany, and he was part of the 1848 revolutionary activities. Took place all over Europe, and including in his hometown of Worms on the west bank of the Rhine, one of the oldest cities in Europe. He's very proud of that. And he points out that now he's come to Tacoma, one of the newest cities. And he refers to Tacoma as Mother of Waters, that being, of course, one of the translations of the name Tacoma, Mount Tacoma being the source of the rivers. So he talks about coming from Europe. He's full of the revolutionary slogans like liberty, equality, and fraternity. And he firmly believes that by throwing the Chinese out, he's doing the noble work of progress and of labor organizing, because he sees the Chinese as scab labor hired by capitalists. So I decided to use the famous anthem of the labor movement of the late 19th century, the Internacional, which is truly a glorious tune, I have to say. And I use it here with a sense of irony. As you listen to this, you'll hear Mayor Jakob Weisbach sing these words, and he's got his own tune. What you don't realize at first is that underneath his tune, the tune of the Internacional is also being played on the instruments, and gradually becomes more and more prominent until finally he himself joins in with the tune of the Internacional. Then there's a kind of a middle section. In this crusade, we engage the United Capital on this coast. I decided that it's like he was practicing his speech to the meeting that he's about to go to. And so this has a kind of a speech-like quality. And then, to finish off, I return to the opening. Chains, prison, and exile were my reward, right? And he's back to being a visionary labor organizer. And again, we hear the Internacional quietly in the instruments behind his tune until finally it swells up and he joins the Internacional to end this aria. Here we hear Joshua Carlyle, the tenor, singing as my computer plays the chamber orchestra part behind him. The second aria we're going to hear is sung by Mrs. May. She is the lead character. Her husband, Mr. Lum May, is a merchant in town, and he was the one who wrote some famous testimony for court documents that told us the story about what happened to him and his family, and pointed out that, at least in his mind, his wife, Mrs. May, had gone mad as a result of the trauma of this event and had never been the same since. Now, this is before she goes mad. She's simply very, very scared at this point. She's upstairs in her house with her two children. The mob is banging on the door. You'll hear pounding in the music. It sounds like the music is bashing and crashing about, which it is. And she is sort of moaning, "Oh, Tacoma." And she, too, calls this the mother of waters. And then she points out that Tacoma became a city because it was the terminus of the railroad, and that railroad was built by Chinamen. And after they finished, they built a Chinatown right here in Tacoma. They worked hard, and now they're being thrown out. Right now, you're big and strong, and you want us gone. But why do you envy my little cup? And here you'll hear Mia Higashiyama, mezzo-soprano, singing the words again to the accompaniment of my computer. The third and final aria we'll hear in just a moment is the final aria of the opera, Mad, Am I Mad? Now this is after her mind has apparently snapped. She and her family are being dragged to the train, to be put on the train. And so the thing I noticed about these words is that there are many different sections. It's as though her mind is flitting around, sort of trying to understand in different ways what is happening. So at the beginning, mad, am I mad? You are mad. She's clearly very conscious and very angry. But then the darkness over my eyes, where is the light? She looks up to what we know historically was a rainy afternoon, and clearly the moon is not there. Moon, you hide your face to spare us in our shame, right? But then this day of humiliation we shall remember. And so on, these rapid changes of mood, this kind of madness as her mind wanders about, trying to understand what's happening. This, of course, was very exciting for me as a composer because I was able to bring back all kinds of music from earlier points in the opera, almost as if her mind is remembering different scenes from the opera. But then at the very end, she curses the city of Tacoma and says, "You will never become a great city until my story is told." And at that point, the music swells up and we hear the train whistle, the train's wheels roar by, taking her away, and we're left with only the sound of rain. Now, we have never had this sung by a voice yet. It's a brand new aria, so you will just hear my computer singing a vocal part. No words, but you'll be able to see the words go by, so you'll know what's happening. So I hope you enjoy these three arias. The scene is the new city of Tacoma in 1885, with its mud streets, wooden buildings, sawmills, railroad terminus, and the burgeoning port along the foot of the bluff. But all is not well in Tacoma. In this aria, Mayor Jakob Weisbach, an immigrant from Germany, prepares himself to lead the meeting that will make the final decision to drive out the Chinese. He thinks back to his youth as a labor organizer in the 1848 anti-monarchist uprisings in his hometown of Worms, Germany, and he wonders if he still has the energy for yet another battle. But as he thinks of the great struggle of labor against capital, he hears in his mind the call of the Internacional, the great international labor anthem, and he puts on his coat for action.
Battle commences, oh timer, do you still have it in you? Do you still have it in you? From Boba to Margins, settlement in a watery area, on the west bank of the Rhine. Ha! Sealed ashore in all of Europe to Tacoma, mother of waters, the newest star in the galaxy of civilization, liberty, equality und fraternity, the noble banner of humanity held firmly above my head. Always this the final struggle. Let us speed our work apace, and tomorrow the International will be the human race. In this crusade, we engage the united capital on this coast, and a government that cares more to expand overseas markets and profits for the better elements than for the working man. A hard fight, a good fight. Prison and exile were my reward. Now the cries of the Chinamen will be my burden. I am glad to bear, oh, sacrificial offering surely. Yet I am not afraid, there must be justice, eternal justice for my people and for my town. The trumpet blows, flags unfurl. You see Tacoma, the old revolutionary is ready to serve. This the final struggle. Let us speed our working pace, and tomorrow's International will be the human race.
On November 3rd, the factory whistle blows, and the white mob forms with guns and clubs. By early afternoon, the mob has reached the house of merchant Lum May on the waterfront where Pacific Avenue slopes down to the railroad tracks and the shores. This is where many Chinese live and have their own community, complete with temple and shrines. The mob raids the storehouse where Mr. May keeps his inventory, breaking down the door with their clubs and helping themselves to whatever they like. They then pound on the door of the house and demand that the May family emerge. Mrs. May is upstairs with her 2 children, cowering in terror and disbelief. She sings to the city she thought would be her home and that of her children.
Oh, Tacoma! Oh, Tacoma! Oh, Tacoma! Oh, From tourists built by bands, Chinaman's hands, you cool to an observant Chinatown, a place we called home. We labored, we built, I poured tears.
As the crowd breaks through the door, Mrs. May, defending her children, suddenly grabs a knife and charges into the crowd, slashing it wildly and screaming. Everyone, including her husband, is shocked and ducks out of the way of her attack. She is quickly subdued, but it is clear that something has snapped, and she is now in a world of her own, the madness her husband described in his affidavit to the court the following year. She is forced to walk through the rain to the waiting train. We enter her mind. Time slows down, and we hear her trying to process these events, and finally cursing the city she thought would be her home. In the end, the train whistle blows, Chinatown bursts into flames, and we are left with only the ever-falling November rain.